All right, how's it going, everybody? My name is William Pitzer. I'm with Rat Dog Games. I'm working on a game called Gunhilder right now, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of a tutorial showing you how to make a stylized rock lava tiling texture. So what we're going to see here, I'm going to start off by working in Maya, and I've got a grid set up that is 32 by 32. It's 16 by 16 right now because I've got it set up to show the grid lines every 2 units, just to simplify the grid a little bit so it's not quite as dense. But what we're going to do is we're going to start off by just dropping a cube into the grid. I'm going to scale it up by 4. I'm going to try to work in perfect units so that we know that it actually fits exactly to the grid as much as possible. You'll see I do deviate that for a minute because we're making organic looking rocks, so I'm going to start pushing and pulling these verts around and trying to shape out something that's a little bit more organic. And then what I'll have to do is you'll see in a little bit too, I have to snap the pivot point to the center of the grid so that we know when we move these over to make sure that it's tiling, that it moves over exactly 32 units, which again is the size of the grid. So you can see me here now just grabbing some of the verts and starting to pull them around, shaping something out that's just not a block basically at this point. The newer versions of Maya are great because they have, you can see me grabbing the little yellow cube there, square, and that allows you to move on that plane. So it allows you to move on the Z and X plane without moving up and down in the Y. It used to be that you had to use the arrows to move in the Z and then in the X independently, and it would take a little bit longer. So it was a nice addition. I missed one of the verts in the bottom, so I'm just going to pull that back out. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to start in the corners, because that's the best way to make sure that best way to start yourself off in the direction of this being a tileable object. So I'm just snapping this down. I'm checking my grid size right now to make sure that I do indeed have it set to 16 by 16 right now, or 32 by 32. And then I'm going to confirm that and set it to one unit every one division every unit. So now the grid is dense again. And so now I'm just going to measure that out to 32 units in the X so that we know that it's exactly tiled down one square. And now I'm duplicating the top corner one, and I'm snapping it over in the Z just to check that corner too. I don't remember if I ended up leaving this here now or not. Yeah, I guess I did leave it here for now, just to set it up so that I could work on the top the top edge and the left side edge. So you'll see me working on those, and I'll get the top edge here fleshed out, and I'll get the left edge fleshed out, and that's pretty much all you need to do for starters. You get those two sides planned out and make sure that they tile, and then you can just duplicate those over as a group, move them over exactly by 32 units, and then you know that you've got the borders of a tiling texture. And then you'll see that I take that and then I just start filling it in. So that's the kind of the most important thing to start yourself off with. So again, I missed a little vert when I was doing my selections. So I'm just pulling that back under. And I'm just kind of making these look different than each other a little bit without going too crazy. I'm also these are remaining really low poly because I don't need them to be dramatic or super realistic looking. So I want to maintain hard edges and kind of like bold shapes in my texture to begin with. So I'm not going to go any crazier than this for the layout in Maya. When we get into Zbrush, I do start sculpting it a little bit more to give it like a little bit more of an organic feeling. But even then, at the end, I'm trying to stick with bold shapes, long hard edges, so that I can get a really clean low poly look at the end after we decimate everything in Zbrush. So I've taken the top one again that I just made, and I'm duplicating that down to check it again. And now I'm going to drag one over to the side. And again, I'm just going to start shaping this out. Just to kind of fit in with the top left rock and be somewhat of a unique shape. And then kind of from here on until this part is done, which I think I take about maybe 20 minutes to do. This is all kind of repetitive at this point. I've kind of given you the major talking points here, and now it's just kind of following through on that and blocking this stuff in. So again, key points for blocking in the tiling texture in Maya. Work on the grid. You can make the grid whatever size you want, but I think going bigger than 32 by 32 it's kind of unnecessary. You want something that's divisible by 2, so that it fits in, preferably something that's divisible by 2 so that it fits in with the sizes of a texture too, so that you stay within a nice square. And yeah, so we're just going to snap the pivot again for this one over to the center. Every new piece that I'm making, I'm snapping the pivot of it to the to 0, 0, 0, so I can make sure that everything is strictly on this grid. And when I do duplicate and move them over to tile it, it'll be exactly 32 units in each direction. I'm kind of being a little nitpicky here. This is interesting working on a tutorial video like this because I'm watching my own work and seeing things that I could, I don't need to be spending the time doing this necessarily. I could speed up if I was if I wasn't worrying so much about that, because a lot of that stuff I can and I will adjust in Zbrush after I export this and bring it in as an OBJ. Using the move brush, things like moving the tip of that stone around is not a big deal at all. So I don't know why I'm so worried about it in here. So again, duplicating, making another one to kind of fill in this side, get the left side worked out. Yep, and then snap the pivot again to 0, 0, 0. So note to Will, cut this, because I'm not doing anything. I'm probably talking to somebody on Twitch. Alright, so now we're duplicating another one up. I'm going to fill in the top now. And then after this one, we should be good to go. I might make one more stone on the bottom left there. I think I do, if I remember correctly. But this pretty much fills in the two sides as soon as I get going. And again, like, I'll be able to take these sides, like you can see me pointing to, and just duplicate them as a collective group slide them over 32 units in the X and 32 units in the Z, and then we end up with the perfect tiling borders of our texture. And then it will just be a matter of filling it in. So we'll work the borders, make them tile, and then it'll just be the kind of task of just populating it with stones in the middle and making the pieces fit into the remaining space as best we can. While also trying to avoid any kind of drastic shifts in size of the stones as much as we can, because if we do that, we know we're going to have a problem with the tiling, appearing as though it's tiling. When it's all said and done, you're going to notice that there's a repeated pattern of something being smaller or something being large or something being larger in these squares, and it will stick out like a sore thumb. So we're going to do our best to try and not have huge gaps in size. I think I do end up with a small stone in there at some point, but the finished product is not that bad. You can kind of see it, but I've seen a lot worse offenders than the result we come out with, so it's not that bad. In a perfect world, I probably would have redone it, but I was so far in at that point that I had to move on. Again, like I said at the beginning, this is for an indie game that we're working on right now called Gunhilder, and I just can't afford to be redoing stuff all the time. I would love to, and if I had endless amounts of time and resources, I am already nitpicky, and I would be even more nitpicky if I had tons and tons of time. But unfortunately, due to production and stuff, kind of just have to move ahead as best you can. I go into these things with a clear goal in mind. I do my planning ahead of time. I figure out exactly what it is I'm going to do through sketches and stuff like that, and I have a game plan for the level or the area it is that I'm working on. And so we do our work I do my work up front, and then when it comes down to actually making it, you kind of just have to execute as fast as you can. So here you can see what I did was I took the left side on the top and I gave them a different color so that I could duplicate them and make my border while easily being able to see the original blocks. And why did I do that? Because the original blocks are the only blocks that we're going to need to export, because those ones are the only ones that we're going to need to sculpt and then decimate and then bring back into Maya at the end, and then we will duplicate those around to create this same thing that we're doing here, but with the finished low poly model. And so if I was to bring all of this in, I'd be sculpting rocks that I had already sculpted. So there's no point in bringing all of them in. I just need to bring the top and left side in, and then the center bricks that you can see that I'm making now. So I'm going to fill this one in, and then I think you'll see me get a little bit worried about the shape on the bottom right there, that's a very unique shape in comparison to the rest of the bricks. That kind of long, narrow wedge shape down there. And I'm going to spend some time, I think, trying to figure out how to try to mitigate that as much as I can. And try to make it not stand out too much in the final tiling texture. Missed a little one down there. So yeah, you can see me looking at that wedge shape down there right now and wondering how exactly I'm going to handle it, because it's such a unique shape that it's definitely going to stand out. So I started diving into it, and I think I'm going to try to just make it work. As best I can. I just kind of start filling in the empty space here. I don't have enough geometry to get such a weird shape, so I end up using the multi-cut tool and just slicing in some new edges for myself, so I can just give myself an extra corner. So I grab those and then pull them over to just fill in the space a little bit better. So now you see me, I am going to try to rework the pocket that I have here so I can give myself a little bit more space, and try to not have as much of a weird shape. I do still end up with a bit of a weird shape, because it's just a funky space to fill, but it ends up working out okay. This is pretty much the most important phase of the whole process. Once you get into ZBrush, I mean, you're somewhat at the mercy of whatever it was that you did in Maya. There's a lot of stuff that you can change in ZBrush, but the measuring tools in ZBrush are really not as up to snuff as the Maya stuff is. So you kind of want to get this as well planned out as possible. Now, the stuff that's in the center, you could totally push that around quite a bit in ZBrush and get away with it, because those aren't on the edges, so they don't have to be perfectly measured. As long as it's in the center, you could pretty much do whatever you want in ZBrush, really. So you're not entirely at the mercy of what you did here, but this is definitely the most important phase, where you're setting up the groundwork for the rest of the texture. And the shapes that you're going to use, and especially because, like I said, you can push stuff around in ZBrush all you want, as long as it's in the center and stuff, and on the edges too, technically. But the more you do it, it just means the more cleanup work you're going to have to do later. So, for the sake of speed, it's best to figure out as much as you can here. And lay a strong groundwork, and then go into ZBrush with a plan and not having to do that much touching up after you're done with the stuff in ZBrush. I think it's pretty unlikely that you're going to have to do zero touching up when you're all done with the sculpts, just because when you smooth things in ZBrush, things tend to move around. It's just the way it is. So corners of shapes get pulled in, things relax. They don't maintain the same exact shapes that they do here. You can have it maintain it pretty well if you turn off smoothing when you do your subdivisions, which you'll see I do for a little while, but you really don't want to do it the whole way, because then you'll end up with really, really rigid looking shapes that don't want to work with you as much. So at the end, I do a smooth subdivide, and then gives myself some nice edges to work with. But in doing so, it does kind of shift things just enough. But to fix that is not that big of a deal. At the end, I just have to go in and I re-export my touched up thing in Maya, drop it back into ZBrush, and just kind of push and pull the edges just to meet up with the duplicated meshes. You'll see. So it's I think it ends up being like a 5-minute cleanup. It's not that bad. So this is pretty much where we're going to end up, I think, for the layout. I'm just doing a little bit of touching up here and there, trying to make sure that edges aren't too close to each other or too far away, that we kind of have like somewhat even spacing between everything. Yep. So now I'm doing exactly what I was saying. I'm deleting all the ones that are no longer necessary, that I don't need to have there, because they're just duplicates of ones that already exist on the left and top sides. That one too. And this is the core group that we'll need. And I'm just going to export this as an OBJ. Pop it open in ZBrush. and you can see it's really low poly, and you've got some subtle artifacting going on when I first brought it in, and then I just subdivided a couple times. Once, I think, once without smooth on, which is that blue button next to the button called divide, the SMT, short for smooth. So if that's on right now, and then I shut it off, subdivided it once, and then turn it back on, subdivided it again. So I could have one subdivision where it maintained those planes as much as possible, and then another subdivision to just smooth them out a tad. And now what I'm doing here is I'm using my trim dynamic brush, and I'm just kind of carving into the edges a little bit to start giving them some shape. Getting some little weird clipping there from the subdivisions that I did, which will smooth out in a little bit, you'll see. So I'm using the trim dynamic, cutting into the edges to start making this look a little more organic, and I don't end up going too much crazier than this. And you can see that these are all separate poly groups. When I turn on the wireframe mode, you could see that they're all separate groups. And how I'm isolating these is by holding Control Shift and then clicking on a single brick, and then that just hides the rest of them. Now what I did just here is I Dynamesh this so that I could get rid of that weird artifacting that was happening on the sides, those clumping together of edges that wasn't allowing me to sculpt into the edges very well. So I just used Dynamesh for that, and that just gives it like a clean, uniform topology. And now this is pretty much just going to be me doing this to every brick for a little while. It'll take some time, but this is it. This is me taking it and just sculpting into each of these bricks, trying to soften up the edges a little bit. And then the ultimate goal is to get these edges, and also I go into it with the clay buildup brush a little bit, and get these turned into shapes that use lots of kind of broad, flat planes, and that will lend itself to the low poly look that we want later when we use the decimation master in the Z plugin menu. The decimation master wants to maintain the exact shape that you have. So if you can just sculpt into it and leave it with these, clean edges and big flat planes, the decimation master loves to just try to keep that, and it will just take any flat surface and basically cut it down to almost no additional topology. So it's really, really great for making these low poly looking assets, but being able to get something that looks organic and looks like something that wasn't just put together in Maya. You could do something like this in Maya, and I'm sure there are people that could do it really, really fast, but for me this is way faster. Trying to make something like this in Maya would take me quite a bit longer. You could, just to get what I'm doing here, wouldn't take super long. You could take these shapes and just use a bevel on them, but a bevel again is going to be uniform. It's going to be the same ratio of a bevel across all edges, and that's not really what we want. We want it to look a little bit more organic, like I was saying. So doing it this way, we can kind of get each edge to be slight variations of width, and even vary from one edge to the other. And then on top of this is just like I was saying, if I was just doing this, you could probably get away with doing it with a bevel in Maya, and then just kind of like pushing and pulling some stuff around to try and vary it up a little bit. But I go further than this. This is just kind of the first step of this. Again, using the trim dynamic brush. Best brush, hands down, for this stuff, for doing any like hard surface, rock stuff. It's awesome. So it's just the same thing over and over again right now. Got a weird little artifact there, so I just smoothed it out and then cut back into it. So again, just control shift clicking on a brick to hide the others and isolate that one. And that works because each of those is a separate poly group. Poly groups is a big thing in Zbrush, especially if you're working on any hard surface stuff. You can't see it here, but if you went, I have it set up to look at up top, you'll see the right to the left of the mirror and merge button and the BPR. There's a line, I think it says line poly or something like that. If you click on that, that will show you the topology of the object, and it will also show you the poly groups too, because the poly groups will be different colors. And you can make polygroups in other ways than just having, an OBJ come in with separate submeshes or something like that. You can make polygroups in ZBrush itself by using masking, or you can use like the clip curve tool that you've seen me use a couple times, where I'm dragging out this line and I'm slicing off sections. You can set that to actually create new polygroups every time you do a cut, things like that. So there's all sorts of uses for polygroups, and all sorts of ways to make them. Masking is probably the biggest. You just mask it off and then you get onto polygroups, and then you say from mask. And now what you see me doing here is the end game was never to have these full gaps in between them. I wanted to give them gaps at the beginning though, so that I could I could have it come in with polygroups, and give myself enough room in between each brick so that I could cut into the edges and not have too much stuff in my way. So now what I'm doing is I'm pulling these together, or I'm starting to at least, and I'm gonna make this one whole object. So I'm gonna pull all these cracks together, make it one object, and then what I end up doing is I dynamesh it again, which you saw me do briefly to kind of clean up some of that weird topology that I was getting on the edges that wouldn't let me sculpt cleanly. So I go to the bottom, which is the best way to pull these together, because then you're not touching the top. We set the top up the way we like it. We cut into the edges nicely. We got good spacing between each of them. And now we just come down to the bottom. We're just tugging the very bottom of these bricks together so that we don't actually have any full-blown gaps going on between each of these stones. It's going to turn into one object. It's giving me some trouble because I didn't want to bother changing my brush size. Looking pretty good. I don't want to move. I'm not moving the outer edges, you'll see, because those are already measured pretty well, and I'm thinking that if I move those too much, it's actually going to ruin the ability for it to tile. And in a minute you'll see that it's already kind of messed up anyways from doing my subdivisions and stuff, I think. So I do end up having to fix it anyways, but at this moment in my workflow, I'm a little worried about touching anything beyond what's in the center. So I pull all this together. It's looking pretty good. Looking good. Then I think I go over... No. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. Okay, yeah. I'm going to duplicate it so that I keep an original copy. This is always a good idea. So you got your subtool. If you're going to do something like you're going to take this thing that you just spent a bunch of time on working on and you're going to Dynamesh it, right? You're going to do something that you don't usually want to come back from. Duplicate your subtool. Keep a clean copy of it. And then take the copy and do the next thing to it. So I'm going to bump up the resolution a little bit so we don't lose any of this detail. And then I'm going to hit Dynamesh. Bam. But I do. I think I Dynameshed the wrong one. Yeah, you gotta delete the subdivision history before you Dynamesh. I guess I didn't see that and did it anyways. And then what it does is it deletes all higher and sets it back to its lowest. So that's why it looked super low poly there for a second. So lesson learned. There's one for you. Delete your highest subdivision, delete your lower subdivision history, and then do your Dynamesh. So we just Dynameshed it. And now you can see that those little cracks, you can see the polygons kind of trying desperately to connect each of them together. And it just looks a little jagged right now because it needs to be smoothed out a little bit. Also, you can see that it actually maintains the polygroups. So it's all one mesh now, but you've still got the polygroup. So even though it's all one thing, we could still shift control click on one of these bricks and isolate it. So again, huge reason why polygroups are awesome. So I'm just doing what I was talking about briefly a moment ago, just kind of smoothing out those cracks a tad because they do get kind of choppy after you do a Dynamesh. And if you leave them like that, when you do your Decimation Master, the Decimation Master is gonna try to keep as much information as possible. So if you keep things looking sloppy, the Decimation Masters think that it's gonna think that that's what you want to do. So it's gonna try to keep that there, and it's gonna create all sorts of weird shit going on in the cracks. So we try to just smooth that out and to avoid that. So I got the general shape locked in there from my first pass, right? But now that we Dynameshed it together and did some smoothing, I'm just going to go back in and start chopping it up and making it look even more organic than it was before. And what we kind of end up with at the end of this whole thing is something that could actually be kind of like a stylized high poly looking rock. And you could take it and bake that. What we end up with. At the end, I decimate the shit out of it and take it to a really low poly look because that's what our game calls for. But if you didn't want to do that, you don't have to do that. You could decimate it just enough to get it down to, probably like 50,000 poly, something like that. Would probably be a reasonable count to maintain all the detail that we end up with, but still be able to, import it to whatever really smoothly. You could import it to whatever you want, really. You could do it in X normal or nulled, but I do the texture bakes in Maya, just because whenever I've done it in X normal, I end up with the borders not being perfectly tiled. It's like almost perfect, but it's just like a hair off, and then you have to go in and you have to do cleanup work and stuff on the edges. And who wants to do that? So I've just kind of stuck with Maya to do it. You could do it with 3D Studio Max too, using what's it called? In Maya, it used to be called transfer maps, and still kind of is, but now they use this turtle baker, and so I don't think it's actually called transfer maps anymore. I think it's literally just you're just using turtle to do your bakes. It's not the transfer maps tool anymore. But 3D Studio Max has the same exact thing, same exact way of doing things. You could take two objects in an envelope and then bake to a surface. I just can't remember the name of the tool. So I'm using the clay buildup and clay tubes to just add some height to these rocks and get something else going on besides just the flat plane that was on the top. Kind of digging into it a little bit, and I end up you can see the gouge that I made there. I thought that I was going to do more of that, and then I ended up not doing that across the rest of the blocks, and so I ended up actually going back to this one at the end and erasing that and trying to smooth it back out again, because it just wasn't I hadn't done it enough elsewhere, and because I hadn't done it elsewhere enough, it was making this brick stand out quite a lot, and we can't have that. You can see me using the clip curve. That's what that is. Clip curve brush is a brush that literally will just slice off in one direction. You'll see when I drag it out, there's at least I hope you can see it. Maybe you can't see it if the video is not good quality enough, but there's a black kind of gradient that sticks out from one side, and that is the side that you're going to cut from after you drag it out. It's super, super useful when doing hard surface stuff like this, or armor, or I use it all the time when I'm doing a character and I'm trying to block in the character shape, because you're not actually doing anatomy at that point. You're just trying to block in proportions and stuff. So it's really great for like dropping in blobs of geometry and then just cutting it up to kind of start to get the shape you generally want. So some of the edges got a little bit messed up, and I'm just pushing and pulling around to actually start to make things feel a little bit more organic, if I can, while still kind of keeping the general style. And now I'm using the damn standard brush. It's another great brush. If you watched any ZBrush tutorials, they probably talked about it. It's a great brush. It does nice cuts into geometry, but it does it smoother than, at least from my experience. There's another brush similar in that it can make these cuts called Slash. But Slash, I found that when I use Slash, it cuts deeper and it cuts more dramatically, and when I go to use my decimation master at the end so I can get something that's exportable and that I can bring in to do a transfer, the places where I use a slash brush end up having some wonky geometry, and kind of like packs of vertices that are all stuck together, and I wasn't able to figure out how to decimate it properly. I don't know why that is exactly, but the damn standard brush does something very similar to Slash, but I don't end up with any of that weird clumping that I've seen when I use the slash. It's not to say that I don't ever see it. I still see it sometimes when I do use the damn standard, but much less frequently. So it looks pretty sloppy right now, but in general, I mean, if some people don't, some people look amazing the entire way through a sculpt, but usually what ends up happening is things look pretty messy for a while in a sculpt, and then because they're just kind of dropping in, volume, just dropping in shape, and then you're going in with your, like my trim dynamic here, and you're kind of taking that volume and then trying to mash it into something that ends up looking more like what you actually wanted. It's just like working with wax or real clay too. You're just slapping on hunks of clay and globs of wax and letting it sit, and then taking your tools out, and then it's just carving away at it, trying to slowly pull that shape out of the mass that you've kind of put there. And now this is just a pile of rock thing, so it's not as fancy as a character or whatever, but it's still the same basic principle right now. That's how I usually sculpt. So I think I'm using the pinch brush for a second, just to try to take some of those edges that got kind of rounded and try to sharpen them up a tad. Pinch is another cool brush. I use it much less often than the other ones, but it's got its uses, definitely. I should probably just be using the trim dynamic and mashing these shapes out. I don't really know why I'm using the pinch right now, but I did. I don't know. I was probably lost in thought for a second, thinking about the next step, and I was like, yeah, pinch sounds like a good idea right now. Let's do this for a second while I mull this over. I could have also been talking to somebody or something, because this was all recorded while I was live streaming. So this was I was probably mid-conversation, and I wasn't hyper-focusing at that moment. So I was like, yeah, let's pinch the edges. That's the best thing we can do right now. Or perhaps I was showing somebody. But anyways, it was only for a second, so it's not the end of the world. And you got to see a brush. You got to see a different brush. So that's always good. Yeah, using the trim dynamic and then just dashing in there with a couple smooth operations and So again, I've been doing this a lot, but just to reiterate, shift control click isolates polygroups. Polygroups still exist even after dynameshing, so it's a pretty sweet tool. So here, because I had done the dynamesh and had started kind of smoothing things a tad to get the cracks to not be so jagged, and to give myself a little bit more room to cut the bottom and give myself a nice flat bottom, I use the move tool, and then I shift click drag up with the transpose tool, which gives me that perfect, you can see the transpose tool right there, and it gives me a perfect vertical line. And then I use that to actually scale it up in just the Y. So you could see I kind of stretched it out just to give myself a little more height on the stones and a little more room to work with between the base of the cracks and the top of the stones. Give it a little bit more height. And you can do that all you want because that's not going to affect the tiling. Only moving in the ZRX is going to affect the tiling at all. So if you want to, change the depth of the texture, go ahead and snap yourself to the side using Shift in Zbrush. Snap to the side view, and use that move tool and just stretch it out in a single direction. Which is one thing that I should mention too, because it might sound weird, is that you do use the move tool to scale in single directions. It is weird. You don't use the scale tool. The scale tool scales up in all directions uniformly really nicely. But if you want to just scale in one direction, in the direction of the transpose tool, which is, I find myself often being what I want to do, you use the move tool. The move tool also moves. If you drag at that transpose tool and you saw the 3 circles, the middle circle will move the object or the subtool, and the circle that is furthest away from the base, from the anchor point, that will stretch the object in whatever direction you pull. So now you can start to see a little bit of what I was talking about, how this wouldn't be something that you would do in Maya really, to kind of get the level of organic feeling that I'm starting to kind of get, would definitely take some time in Maya. You could, and like I said, I guarantee you there's people out there that are crazy in Maya with Maya sculpting tools. Maya does have some sculpting tools, or using soft select to just like nudge things around, or maybe they're just crazy poly modelers that could do it really easily. But for me, this is a lot faster. I tend to use ZBrush for most things now. I used to use Maya more, and then I started doing more character work and totally fell in love with ZBrush. And because I started figuring out ways to use it for characters, like when a character had something that was hard surface on them or armor or whatever, it kind of just took over, and pretty much my favorite tool. Can't live without Maya still. Not saying, Maya is obsolete for me at all. Use Maya for pretty much everything too. It has its place in the workflow for almost everything at some point. So, still there. And now I'm just duplicating it, which you can do by dragging out the move tool and then holding control down and then clicking and dragging the middle circle on the transpose tool. And this is not accurate. ZBrush's measuring tools are, as far as I'm aware, kind of limited. You can measure things technically. You can set the scale on that transpose tool, and those little tick marks that you see on the transpose tool, those represent whatever form of unit you want it to. You could set it to be centimeters, meters, millimeters, whatever, and then you can tell it how many tick marks you want to show on that transpose tool. So you could still measure things. Like if I'm doing a character, I could use the transpose tool and set my scale on there and how many ticks I want to have on the tool, and then be able to measure out, okay, her arm is, I don't know exact measurements right now off the top of my head, but her arm is a half a meter long, and then I want to go down and I want to see, okay, is her leg longer than that, and you can drag it out and be able to actually measure, like, okay, this is her arm length in comparison to her leg length and stuff like that. But for getting it perfectly moved over 32 units, or centimeters in this case, I don't know how to do that, so I don't rely on it, because I can't. So I was just pulling it over though, and duplicating it to be able to just show myself, like, okay, this is what this is going to look like when it's all duped around and it's actually tiling. So this is actually one of those blocks I was talking about for a little while ago, where I had dug those big divots into it, and I realized later on that it just wasn't going to work because I had not made the other blocks in the texture with these big cuts into them like I did that, and it was just going to have to go. I was going to have to fill it in and smooth it out because it didn't make any sense anymore. When I duplicated around and I tested it out, I noticed that you could see it really well, and that if I left that in there, the tiling nature of the texture would be pretty well compromised, because you'd be able to see it. And I think I go into some of the other ones. Maybe I think I go into the one at the bottom too, and maybe clean that up. The one in the top left was the most egregious offender. It was really deep. It was a big divot. So I just saved the project. So you can see up there, I've got 345,000 active points on this subtool right now. It's a lot. I mean, it's not actually a lot for a model. I think I have my limit set to like 16 million in ZBrush right now. It depends on how much memory you have, how much RAM you have, and stuff like that. But ZBrush can handle a lot. That's what it's designed to do. So it's not a lot for the program, but 300,000 is obviously way too much for what we want for the game. And I guess I'm just checking again to see exactly how much I'm gonna have to tweak on the edges. You can see here that I'm seeing right now that there are some gaps on the sides. And this is kind of just for myself, just to kind of see like how well is it tiling, what's the deal here, and then yeah, like I can see kind of the rough idea of how many gaps there are on the edges, because obviously after subdividing, using a lot of move tools and carving these things up, things just shift a little bit. There's nothing you can really do to avoid it altogether. So, and not a big deal though, not a huge deal. You'll see how I kind of deal with it in a couple minutes, I think. So I think I mask out the one in the center, and then I think I get rid of the other ones, or I start trying to deal with it here. I guess I just start nudging things around a little bit, and I get it as close as I can to kind of fixing the problems that I can see. But again, these duplicates that I dragged to each side are not perfect, obviously, because I couldn't measure out exactly 32 units. So, but I know that they're a good rough guess. And it's okay if the finals intersect with each other, because as long as there's no gaps, it doesn't matter. So I'm trying to start dealing with it. Trying to start cleaning in these edges a little bit. So I deleted the other ones that I had on the side that I had masked out, and now I'm just gonna start decimating this. So I think I start doing 20% decimation, which what that means is it will only maintain 20% of the geometry that you had before. Maybe I didn't do 20%. I don't know what I do. Oh, that was just the preprocess. That's why. Decimate current. So you have to go up to Z plugin, go down to Decimation Master. You do preprocess, let that do its calculations, and then you actually go back down, and then you'll click on the actual decimate. You can see there decimate current, preprocess current, and decimate current. And you want to preprocess first, and then decimate. Usually, if you try to decimate without doing any preprocessing, it'll just say this hasn't been processed. We don't know what to do with it yet. So help me figure that out. And you can change the percent of decimation. You saw it's one of the sliders in that same menu. You can change it to be 50% or 80% or whatever, which I think I just did. I changed it to like 50%, so I did not cut it down too drastically. So we're starting to get that low poly look. This is kind of that look that we're going for in the game, where you can clearly see the polygons in the geometry. We have a lot of geometry that's in the game that's just this, and it's not even made into a texture map. It's just like a lot of rocks and stuff that are just cut way down. So we have these huge rock walls that are maybe like, a couple thousand polys, but we're not trying to hide it, because it's enough information to really give you those shapes and see the planes, but with a little color and a subtle normal map, it can really kind of work nicely. So I decimate it one more time, try to chop it down just a little bit more, try to make it not look quite as dense as it was, and try to, I think what I'm doing is off to the side I'm looking at some other rocks that I have and trying to match the kind of density of the polygons to those rocks and see how crazy I should go. So we're going to export this as an OBJ, which you just do up in the top right in the tools menu, hit export, and it defaults to OBJ, I believe. So just name it, save it out. And we'll pop back into Maya, go down to import, select your OBJ, drop it in, and that's what it looks like after it's been dropped back in. And it should be in the exact same spot pretty much where we left it. Pivot point still at 0, 0, 0. The edges and things have definitely moved slightly due to me working with it in ZBrush, but for the most part it's the same. And now we're going to duplicate it, and we're actually going to snap it on the grid. So now we're actually going to see what it looks like if it was perfectly tiled. And so I move it over 32 units, and you can see we've still got a gap, got quite a big gap. I'm going to dupe it again. I think at this moment I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, I'll bring it back into ZBrush, I think, but how bad is it? Or I'm talking to somebody on stream. Probably doing that too. Which is the reason, obviously, why I'm re-recording this audio. That's why I'm talking over this and kind of guessing once in a while as to what it is I'm going to do next, because the audio from the actual recording is, you wouldn't want to listen to it. It's me talking to people that you can't see the chat from, and has nothing to do with what I'm doing. So wouldn't be very good for the video, I don't think. So all I need to do is keep the one on the left that I duplicated, and then duplicate it one more time and go up to the top. And then what I need to do is I need to get that corner filled in the top left, because that counts too. So I need to make sure that my core group there in the middle that's on the grid meets up with that too. And you can see there's a gap there. So I need to I need to have all of those sides entirely covered, the top and the left and the top left corner. And then I will take those, I'll export this whole thing back into ZBrush, and again, mask off the other 3 that I duplicated, move the edges of the center group there to meet up with the duplicated ones on the sides. And by doing that, we're going to guarantee that when we do tile it, it will now tile, and it will meet up on every edge. So you can see there's a pretty good gap there on the left, especially. So the top is actually pretty well put together, but we had to bring it in just to make sure that all of our ducks were in a row. Doing this will, the worst thing would be not checking this and then having to go in Photoshop and try to fix things, which I actually probably wouldn't even do. I would probably just come all the way back here and do my bakes all over again, because touching it up in Photoshop is kind of unreliable and very tedious. So I'm just grabbing that that middle, and you'll notice I said I was going to mask out the side ones, but I actually didn't mask it out, and that's because you don't actually have to, as long as they're separate objects. You can use the Move Top Topology tool, which the shortcut for is BMT. You can find that in the brush menu. It's a default brush, and it's just an alternate move brush, but it will only move things based on topology. So if something is a separate object or a separate submesh, then it won't touch it. So I use that to pull them over and meet up. So I delete the other ones. They're no longer needed because I want to duplicate this new one that I have where I fix the edges. We don't want those old ones around us anymore. We want this new one duplicated around. So now we duplicate this to all the sides, and we're going to do a 3x3 grid to make sure we have all the corners filled in and all the sides. You can see here, because I only have it on 4 sides, that the corner there, the grid is still empty, and we can't have that. We have to duplicate this and fill in all the corners, make sure we have all the bases covered. I think I'm just looking at it as a tiling texture right now and seeing if there's anything that I need to go back and fix desperately. You can kind of see that there are some things like that were sticking out to me. So I think I actually go in and get rid of it here in Maya. Yeah. So I'm just using the Merge Vert tool and snapping these up and just trying to get rid of this divot a little bit, because it was standing out pretty drastically. Yeah, you can see it pretty well in the other ones. So I delete those again because now we've made an edit to the center one. So I'm going to take the center one again and I'm going to dupe it over, do the same thing, and position them where I just had the other ones. But so 32, 32, negative 32, negative 32 in the X and Z. Whoops, I typed in 312. Slip of the finger. 32. Beautiful. So yeah, like I was saying, that corner's got a gap, so I don't want to take this, dupe it down, move it down 32. Same thing. Do it up there. There's actually no gap there. It's not off the grid, but just in the off chance, for the sake of the bake, I just like to have a really big source mesh. It's got a cleanly tiling texture. We do have to do that, I think. And then this one too. Yep. So now we've got, this is kind of a representation of what it's actually going to look like when it's tiling. Like I was saying at the bottom, you can kind of see there's a kind of unique pattern there with a gap that's a little bit deeper, and the shape of those small stones are a problem. So you can kind of tell based on that it is repeating. They kind of cause a line to be created a little bit. But once it's all textured and done, it's a lot less noticeable. So I let it slide for now. You can see I'm thinking about, do I go fix this? Do I go change this all over again? But I didn't really have time. I think the stream was coming to a close pretty soon, and I had other things I had to do that day, and I had to move on. I had a bunch of other textures that I had to be working on too, because we were in a deadline for getting a boss room done, because the boss was being implemented, and we had to have that boss room ready for the fight to be tested and stuff. So anyway, I merge all these into one thing, and then I create a plane. Okay, I didn't merge it, but I make a plane, and I make the plane exactly the size of the grid. I'm just checking, just because I'm doubting myself. I'm just like, okay, I did the measurements right? Yep. And you do that by just doing create, going up to the create menu, going to polygon primitives, and then clicking plane. And then over on the right in the channel editor below, you can see in the inputs there would be a size for it, and you could tell it how many divisions you wanted to have and what size. And I think I put in 32 by 32 or 16 by 16, and that made it match up perfectly with the grid. So it would have been 32 by 32. And now I'm duplicating that plane, and I'm dragging one right below. So making sure not to move this in the X and Z. It's got to stay perfectly aligned with the grid, right at 0, 0. And so I'm getting one below the mesh, and I'm calling that the transfer tile, okay? And we're going to use that to project onto, and that's going to be the one that accepts the transfer. Now the one on top is going to be the projection, or the envelope, so we're going to call that projection, which you can see I did in the inspector. Now the rocks themselves are going to be the source mesh. So I'm going to take all those, and just for the sake of simplicity and cleanliness in the editor, in the outliner, I'm going to take all these, and I'm going to freeze their transforms, delete their history, and then combine them all into one object. There's no need to have them be separate. It just makes my outliner look cleaner for myself. You don't have to do it that way, but I do. So now we're going to start the baking process. So I go to the Turtle Texture Baker, and we're in the texture baking settings, and change the type from preview to bake. I should do it in a second. I think I'm talking to somebody on stream. And they were asking about transfer maps, and I was telling them how it's different now. Alright, so we got texture baking settings. Change it from preview to bake. Now in the targets, so we have target surfaces, source surfaces, and envelope surfaces, okay? I close envelope surfaces for the moment because we're going to deal with the settings below, and you've got the transfer settings and the maps that we're going to actually export. So here, I change this, the texture bake settings from 512 by 512, because that's really low, and I want to work with something that's really high density. So I change it to 4K. 4096 by 4096. And then I change where my files are going to go. You can change the file format or whatever the file naming convention that you want to use. I leave it the way it is. Then I'm going to export a full shading, a normal map, a displacement map. And I do ambient too, but to be honest, the only real maps that I end up actually using from Maya are the normal and the displacement. The ambient doesn't end up baking correctly for whatever reason. Nothing down there needs to be really touched. So now we're going to input our surfaces. So the target surfaces is going to be that plane on the bottom, like I was talking about before. So just select that and then go over and add select. Add selected. Now we're going to add the source. Bam. Add the rocks. The source is the mesh that we're going to project onto the transfer surface, the target surface. Now the envelope in a regular bake would be, a model that you use surrounding a character. It's just for projecting. But in this case, it's just this plane. It's the same thing. We're going to project straight down onto the target surface below. So grab that and add that to the envelope surfaces. And now we're going to come up to bake. Just hit bake, let it run its thing. And I cut this because the baking process took like, I think it took like 20 minutes or something like that. So I cut that, and now we're in Photoshop, and we've got the normal map here. This is the normal map that came out of Maya. And the first map you saw, I think, was the displacement map. So this is the rock that's kind of in game right now that I'm basing this off of. This is the challenge room teleporter in game, and this is the general look of the challenge room that we're working on. The challenge room hasn't been made yet, but the teleporter has, and I'm using the colors from this, the hex colors from that, to make my texture that's going to be used in the room itself. So I was in there grabbing the colors. This is the perfect hex color. I think it was 21F or something like that. Or just 21. I don't know. So now I've got a normal map. And I'm showing how you can take a normal map and actually get a pretty good diffuse or albedo texture out of it just by desaturating it. Now this is the beauty shot that we got out of Maya, and it's really, really contrasty and not that great. So I do like to take, even in almost all textures I like to take the normal map and I do duplicate it and desaturate it and use it just to, I usually turn the opacity way down on it too, but I use it to lend just some definition to the texture. In this case, I don't need to play with the opacity at all on it because it's so graphic looking. But you can see the video might not be super high quality, so it might not be looking that awesome. But I'm trying to talk about a normal map that I use on the rocks that just gives it a slight variation. So here we've got the displacement map, or the height map, as I'm naming it. And this is the key map. This is the map that we're going to use to get that glow, okay? So what I just did is I inverted it, just doing Control I. And now I'm going to come up to adjustments on the height map. We're going to go to brightness and contrast. Nope. I didn't want that one apparently. I want levels. That's what I want. And we're going to tighten these levels up a little bit to get the white to be a little bit thinner. There's too much white going on. We want the white to be isolated in the cracks. And we don't want it to be bleeding out too much onto the rocks, because we really do want it to look like the light is bursting from just those cracks. Now you can see that there's white on top of the rocks. It's a problem because I had some of those divots on the top of the rocks. Sometimes it dipped down a little bit. So this is a height map, and it knew that there was a change in height on the top. So we're getting some white on top. So I'm going to make a layer on top of the height map, and I'm just going to go in with my black and a soft brush and just start painting this out manually to try to get rid of this, because I don't want it to be glowing on top of the rocks. We just want it glowing from the cracks. No need for it to be glowing up top. So again, just to recap, so far we've just got a normal map. The normal map is going to be used just the way it is. I'm not going to do anything to the normal map. That will be our normal map. Then I took the normal map itself, duplicated it, and entirely desaturated it. So I turned it into a grayscale map, okay? And that's going to be a map I use to help with the diffuse channel in the material. And now I'm taking the height map after I just did those alterations, and I'm actually going to go to color balance. I'm going to crank up the red and the yellow. And this is just for a starter. I have to do this a couple times to get it to where I want it, because as you can see, cranking it up doesn't really get it to where you want it to go. So I darken it a little bit, desaturate a little bit, play with some of my settings, because I don't want it to be super, super bright. And then I'm going to do the color again, and you'll see it starts to pop pretty quickly. Yep, I punch it up some more. And I think what I end up doing in a second is I bring in an image of the first I save it, apparently. Challenge tile texture. Save out my PSD, so I have a final PSD file. And I'm actually going to drop the height map, I think. I don't think I have it in this PSD file. Oh, okay, here we go. Sweet. This was the thing I was originally talking about. So I grabbed the emissive map from that rock, from that challenge room teleporter that I showed you a brief glimpse of, that's actually sitting in Unity. And I'm going to try to match the red to that as much as I can. So you can see it's not quite the same at the moment, and we need to kick it up a notch to make it meet up. So I just boost up the red a tad more. Crank the yellow a little bit. Red, I slide up, yeah. Yeah, we had a little bit too much of the red bleeding into the rocks themselves. So I'm just playing with the levels again to try to push the black into the glow and make the glow a little bit more isolated than it was before. So we get a little bit more definition in the cracks, and the lighter parts of the cracks start to have a little more variance to them, like they do in the in this emissive over here that you can see that I'm looking at for reference. And now I'm gonna export those maps. Just make sure I have them all tidied up. And take my PSD file and just try to clean it up a little bit. Take all the maps that make up the emissive, put them in a folder, name them emissive. The 2 maps that make up the diffuse, group them up, put them in a folder and name them diffuse, and then rename the normal, and then import the height map again as a blank height map. The only height map I have in there is one that I turned into the emissive, and I want the actual height map sitting in the PSD file too. So I have one PSD file with everything in there. And now I've got my textures exported as individual PNGs, and I'm just exporting the diffuse as the last one. And now I'm going to show you just a quick glimpse at what it looks like on a model. So this is the display tile OBJ, which is the same model that we used to do the transfers in Maya. I just exported it, and I'm going to use that to display the texture on in Marmoset. And I'm placing the normal map on there, so you can see how quickly the normal map takes it from obviously just a flat plane to looking like it has a lot of depth. The albedo, I'm going to drop the diffuse map on there. Bam. A lot more definition already. Pretty crazy how quickly that comes together. And again, all of this was made from maps. And there's the emissive. Marmoset's a really great tool for just getting a quick glimpse at the thing you just made. I love it. And here's the height map, or displacement map here. And it comes in really, really crazy, but you just turn the scale down a little bit in Marmoset, and you can see that it's doing its job. It's giving it actual height. The geometry is actually being altered by the height map, but just enough to give it a sense of depth without going too crazy. And down here in Marmoset, you can play with the click on the sky and then go down here to the presets folder. And you can change the lighting setup. This is using HDR lighting, so whatever the skybox is that's around it, that's going to dictate what the lighting setup is. You don't have to use HDR. You could turn it off and use regular lightings too if you wanted to set it up. But this is the easiest way to look at things, and it mimics Unity pretty well. And here you can see what the difference is if it didn't have the normal map on it. It's pretty drastic. Becomes extremely flat right away. So the normal map really is doing a lot of work. Emissive off, that's the diffuse only on there in the height map. Very flat. The emissive still brings a lot of life to it, but the normal map is obviously very key to making it come to life. So that's it, guys. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe down below. I'm definitely planning on doing some more of these videos in the future, so stay tuned to the channel. You can find me on Twitter at W_Pitzer, and you can watch me on Twitch at twitch.tv/ratdoggames on Monday and Wednesday mornings from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific time. Every other day over there's either games or programming stuff going on too. We work on Gunhilder a lot on the channel, so no matter what, it's totally worth a look. Please feel free to leave your comments down below. I'll be checking in on them, and I'll try to reply to as many as I can. Thanks again.